Dear friends, thank you very much for joining us for another edition of Talking Europe. We have been focusing on the European elections for the past few episodes, hosting several MEPs. And today we're very fortunate to have with us Frances Fitzgerald from Ireland, a member of the European Parliament who is also a VP of the European People's Party. Frances, thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here with us. We've had five exciting and challenging years in the EU, but also close to the world. What do you think were the main issues that the Parliament had to deal with in the previous term?
Well, it's been an extraordinary, challenging period. I mean, when I was elected in 2019, it was Brexit, it was green, it was digital. They were the key issues. Suddenly, where's Brexit now? Suddenly, we went into COVID and the pandemic and all of the work around that, which preoccupied not just everybody here in Brussels, but of course the entire continent. And then you had, what we never expected, an aggressive war from Putin. So, and then of course the Israeli-Palestine, Gaza conflict. So it's been a very challenging time, not to mention the cost of living and energy crisis. My own feeling is that the leadership that came from here in Brussels has really been extraordinarily good. And I do believe it has restored faith to a certain degree in the European institutions. I think Ursula von der Leyen's leadership has been very striking and very good.
So you assess the response of the European Union as appropriate, because we have also noticed from our contact with citizens that, especially when it came to the pandemic, but also the energy crisis that followed Russia's invasion, yes, they did turn to the EU for answers, realizing that perhaps the national government couldn't provide the solution they needed.
Well, you see, I think that's the whole point. What is the benefit of the EU? It's about providing joint solutions to problems that are beyond the national. And of course, I should have mentioned climate change. Of course, you know, the Green Deal, that was the key. And you still see the crisis that's there. So very successful to get the Green Deal through. But of course, a bit of impatience emerging towards the end with over-regulation in business and an over-ambitious plan in relation to the implementation of the Green Deal, even though we absolutely need it. But I think the politics around it began to change slightly towards the end of the mandate.
Now, perhaps looking forward a little bit, we have another 5 years, a new term for the European Parliament, new leadership for the institutions. What do you think will be the key issues for the first few months of the new Parliament, but also for the next few years?
Well, you have to think immediately of the implications of the war. I mean, let's face it, this is an attack on democracy. No question about it. It's an attack on European democracy. So I think security and defence will have to be very centre stage, with all of the implications of that, the different attitudes in member states, and of course the budgetary implications are huge in relation to the war. So that is going to be quite preoccupying. And then of course the ongoing issues around energy will be there. The cost of living, we see inflation coming down a little. Should inflation go up again? If costs don't come down, that's a very big preoccupation for individuals, for citizens, for families. So I would say defence and security, and I would also say climate change and the implementation. And we're going to have to look at more supports for our citizens, for our farmers, because the costs, the transition, the concept of a just transition is going to be really important. And then, of course, as I've said, the cost of living. I mean, that is ongoing in relation to the inflation question. But there's also, other issues. I would say Europe, geopolitically, is not in a very strong place. From a business point of view, how are we going to get that competitive edge back? How are we going to keep innovation here? How are we going to support entrepreneurs? There is a new report coming out, the Draghi report, in the next few weeks. That's going to be very critical in terms of scene setting and how the Parliament responds. And then you have a different composition of the Parliament as well. So that will influence the agenda.
In the weeks and months before the European elections, we had a lot of talk about the surge of the far right, the appeal, the allure of populist politicians, and some of the easy answers they offer to people's challenges. How do you assess the results of the European elections and the fact that perhaps that surge didn't materialize everywhere?
Yes, it materialized very strongly, of course, in some countries. I mean, really serious in France and Germany. But on the other hand, what I see it in Ireland, I see it in other countries, I see populism being challenged by, these results are challenging to populism. Now, you do have more far-right members, that's for sure, you have more extremes. But on the other hand, the centre, I would say the centre has held, even if the centre more recently has moved somewhat to the left, but the centre has held. And my own belief is that the only way to deal with populists who offer simple solutions to complex problems is to confront them. Politicians from the centre have to show that our policies work, how we will implement them, and we have to confront those simplistic statements, which are also, of course, racist and homophobic. So we have to stick with our principles of equality, the principles and the values of the European Union, which are about valuing the individual, giving dignity to the individual, respecting difference, providing equality. I think you stick with the values of the European Union and you can't go far wrong, but you have to fight for them. I mean, democracy is under threat. We see the backlash on women's rights, on gay rights. We see the backlash. So you have to fight that. And I'm very confident. And it was worrying before the election with those predictions. They were a bit extreme, but I think the results show that the centre can hold. But I would make the point, there's a very big responsibility on the politicians from the centre not to be united and to work well and cohesively together, because otherwise you're giving sustenance to the far right or indeed the far left.
Indeed, and it's important to maintain the pro-European alliance we have enjoyed for decades now in the Parliament, but also in other institutions. Make sure that the EPP, the SND, the Liberals, perhaps even the Greens, group together to defend those values.
I think, I'm confident about the EPP. I want to make sure that all those parties of the centre really see the consequences of not working cohesively together, because the right is obviously on the increase. People are saying things now in public meetings it would not have been acceptable to say even a couple of months ago. And that's not good enough. So we have to be very alert, and also very alert in relation to the threat that Russia poses.
Indeed. And perhaps talking about our fellow citizens, we saw an increase in the turnout, over 50% across Europe, but of course huge discrepancies between member states. Some of our polling has shown that citizens are disengaging with democracy. They feel that just voting once every 4 or 5 years isn't enough. How can we involve them a bit more as an antidote also to those fake promises the populists offer?
Well, it's all about engaging with the issues that people are concerned about. There are some quite difficult issues at the moment across Europe. Migration clearly is a concern. I mean, every country is going to have to look at how they handle migration. The worry for people is that we don't have the services and the supports in place to deal with the numbers of migrants, and that the system isn't efficient and doesn't make its decisions quickly enough. I think if you engage with the issues that people are concerned about in a reasonable way and you show action on them, that engages people. We see this when governments start dealing with migration in a more cohesive way, more efficient and fair way. The anxiety that citizens have, goes down, and they believe more in government and in a more centrist government. You take housing. This is one of the biggest issues across Europe. We don't have a European solution. We need to be investing more in social and affordable housing. We need to make sure the European Investment Bank puts more money into that, because this is causing what I would call intergenerational anxiety, which is so serious because young people are leaving their countries feeling they can't afford housing, and it's of huge concern to parents and grandparents. This is about daily living. If you start to provide solutions, people get engaged. You can't be talking about, they don't get changed to the treaties. They don't understand. I mean, they understand it, but they don't care. They say, yeah, get on with it if you're going to do that. But deal with the issues that are relevant and show people the European dimension. They saw with COVID, and they saw the leadership on Ukraine. And I think leadership really matters. I think all of our party leaders, they really have to show leadership, talk to the people, explain the policies, deal with the issues of concern to young people. Housing, as I say, is a key one. And of course, good jobs in Europe.
Indeed. And perhaps often when people are thirsty for answers and they go up to the well and they find it dry, they will indeed drink mud. They will drink the lies that are given. And you're absolutely right in saying that it's a responsibility for mainstream parties to do what's necessary to address the question.
Yes.
The majority of our citizens are neither racist nor homophobic.
Absolutely, they're very reasonable and fair.
Indeed.
And you've got to kind of reach out with decent policies. And I think we do that most of the time, but we need to communicate them somewhat more because most of our legislation comes from Europe. Whether you're talking about digital legislation, safety online, child abuse, all of these areas have European dimensions. Health, increasingly. I think citizens would like to see us doing more at a European level, even though it's seen as a national competence, because they know if you want access, for example, to cheaper drugs, if you want a good cancer strategy, this has got to be Europe-wide. It's not a national issue. It is, of course, but the solutions are to be found at European level. And I think if we address those issues more and more, then that disillusionment will, people will see what Europe does. But it can be difficult to communicate it at times, but it's very worthwhile.
Indeed. And, you as an MEP, us here as an NGO, civil society, we do our part. And it's very important also to do this every day, every week,
Absolutely.
every month, not just before the European elections. And I think the role of the MEPs is crucial in engaging with their constituency. Now, let's just fast forward 5 years from now. Let's imagine that we are sitting together again, assessing what this parliament has done. What will be your greatest ambition? What would you like to say that the EU achieved that?
Well, the key issue is actually saving democracy. I really hope that Ukraine win the war. I think that's really important to deal with that dreadful aggression from Russia. It's important for the whole of Europe, indeed the whole world. This is a fight for democracy. So we have to support Ukraine and make sure that they can deal with that dreadful threat from Russia. The dangers of not winning that war are so profound, have such implications for Eastern Europe and for the rest of the world, actually. And also we've got to be conscious of America, where America is going to go with their presidency. That will also impact hugely. 5 years from now, I would like us to have dealt with the energy crisis so that the cost of living comes down, that we have moved forward hugely on sustainability issues in business and in our world generally. I think that's critical. We see the challenge of climate change, where people are suffering so much, it's going to cause more migration. So I think we have to be very serious about the implementation of the Green Deal over the next few years. We have to find money, we have to raise money because the budget is a problem right now. But I think those two issues are really very key. And, to keep Europe a safe place, a good place to have a family, a good place to grow old, a good place to enjoy a quality of life with the values of the European Union. We wouldn't have said this maybe a couple of years ago, but they have been under threat even in member states. So, we have to fight for all of that. But I'm confident with the results of the European elections that we have enough MEPs who have that vision and who will sustain it.
That's a very inspiring way to conclude the conversation, and we look forward to working together from whichever place you are to advance those values and make sure that indeed Europe becomes stronger and delivers for citizens. Thanks again for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.